Good morning, everyone. Today we're joined by Professor Michael Amezcua, Assistant Professor in our Department of History. He joined our community this summer, and we're so pleased to have this opportunity to welcome him to our series. And Michael, I'm so glad that you could be here today, and I know we're all looking forward to hearing more about you and your work. So let's get started. You're one of the newest faculty members in our history department. Tell us what your experience has been like so far, meeting and working with your colleagues in the department and getting to know some of our Georgetown students.
Well, first off, thank you, President DeJoya, for inviting me to be in dialogue here with you today. It's an honor. Yeah, it's definitely been strange to start a new position, not really having a feel for the campus, not really knowing where ICC is, the home of my department. But at the same time, through the virtual tools that we've had to connect both with my colleagues and my students, that level of connection, I feel like, has really brought us really close. I do not feel very distant from my colleagues. They've been incredibly welcoming. Whether it's been through just department meetings or other kinds of gatherings that we've had virtually. And likewise with my students, I feel like that through office hours and also through just regular class, I have been able to connect with them in ways that maybe that connection wasn't always there, even in the physical way. So yeah, strange, but also not so bad. Business as usual.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I do look forward to the moment when we can take you right inside the ICC building and a few other of our buildings on campus. This fall, you taught a course on U.S. Latinx history. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of designing and teaching that course? What aspects of U.S. Latinx history did you seek to explore with our students?
Yes, the class, U.S. Latinx history, I've taught many times before, but this has definitely been the first time I've taught it in this particular way through virtual tools. And so I've had a lot of help. Both my colleagues were really helpful in giving us tips on just how to engage students and not just lecture at them and be this talking head all the time. And also through candles, which was also very helpful in really helping us find ways of engaging students in multiple forums. So the course U.S. Latinx history is really about Latinx peoples, which is really this kind of broad term. And really what we're studying are, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Central Americans, and Dominicans. That's a lot of different groups under this one big umbrella term, and which, of course, as we've seen through the recent election, people are talking about Latinx people are not a monolith. And of course, this class and my students would definitely be able to attest to that. The class moves chronologically from roughly the early 1800s to the present. We cover things like European conquest, indigenous resistance, immigration, labor, community formation, and social movements. So there's a lot to cover there. But one of my favorite parts about this class is teaching the students through primary sources and archival documents, the tools that historians use to think about the past. And I just invite them to imagine what it was like to live through a given moment, a certain period. There's a source that I used earlier in the semester, a diary entry from a Mexican-American student attending Santa Clara College in California in the 1860s. So this is, after the US-Mexico War, California is part of the Union. And, the student is attending this Jesuit institution. And the diary entry talked about the student feeling isolated from his peers and from the faculty, and just feeling kind of like the odd man out, right? My students really resonated with that. They were fascinated by the source and really they just connected with it in really, of course, really important ways. And that's really rewarding for me to see them think through the documents themselves and be able to then connect it to their own life experience.
Sure. Oh, that's terrific. That's just terrific. Now, you've done quite a bit of research into Latinx communities in Chicago in particular. And last year, you received an Arnold Hirsch Award for Best Article in a Scholarly Journal for your work on Latinx politics in Chicago in the 1960s and 70s. Can you share a little bit about the article? What drew you to that time period and the events that you wrote about?
Absolutely. That was really a joy to write. I'm fascinated by Latinx politics, but also machine politics. There's no better place to study machine politics, I would argue, than Chicago, right?
Uh-huh.
Home of longtime Mayor Richard J. Daley. And actually, I had a lot of questions during the early phases of my research about how to connect Mexican immigrants, or think about Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans, and then this huge, well-oiled political machine of Chicago, and this really dominant mayor who had clout not just through the city, but of course nationally as well. In my research, I discovered that actually machine politics didn't ignore Latinx people. Daley knew Mexican Americans quite well, and actually created through his friends and his allies a relationship with Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans. So the article really explores that relationship, how it evolves, really from a point that we historians, especially Latinx historians, we often think about the Kennedy campaign as being this really pivotal moment for connecting with the Democratic Party with Latinos. But I found that Daley had already been laying the groundwork for a relationship that would be very valuable for the machine to curry favor with Mexican immigrants, Mexican Americans, not necessarily to create political appointments for them or elected positions necessarily, but simply to have some eyes and ears in the barrio where Latinos, Mexican Americans could interpret the neighborhood's needs to Mayor Daley. It wasn't always a peaceful relationship. There were a lot of controversies, as of course the 1960s and 70s is a period in which there's different forms of politics that are coming together, in which younger Latinx people are engaging in left politics and radical politics that and want no place in the work of the political machine. And so I try to show those dimensions as well in the article, and it was a real joy to write and to research.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, you have a book forthcoming from the University of Chicago Press next year entitled Making Mexican Chicago, From Post-War Settlement to the Age of Gentrification. So tell us about the book, and what are some of the stories and insights in this history that you hope readers will take away when they read the book?
Yeah, well, if you allow me just to backtrack a bit and
Sure.
talk about how I came to this project. I'm not from Chicago. I grew up in Los Angeles, California. My parents were undocumented immigrants who liked to tell me stories about their own family's migrant histories. And one of the stories that really stood out was a story that my mother would tell me about her mother and how she was born in Chicago. And that shortly after she was born and she lived in Chicago for a few years, she was deported, repatriated with her parents during the Great Depression. And I found that really fascinating. The Great Depression was a time when obviously it was a hard time for everybody in America. But for Mexicans, they were often scapegoated and vilified, blamed for the ills of the economy. And around 1.8 million people of Mexican descent were deported, repatriated to Mexico, including Mexican Americans, like my grandmother Ofelia. I was fascinated by that, having never been to Chicago, only knowing Los Angeles really. Um, and that fascination really became a scholarly pursuit to really understand Chicago. And one of the big interests of mine was really to look at what we call the urban crisis, right? A lot of the kind of social and political disinvestment out of the city in the post-war period through the lens of Mexican immigrants. I was fascinated to read and research how Mexicans navigated things that we are quite familiar with in other contexts: segregation, redlining, disinvestment. For Mexican people, they were also concerned with the looming threat of deportation. And I looked at the intersections of things like deportation and urban renewal to really tell a new story about how they remade communities in Chicago. It ends with looking at the topic of gentrification, really an ongoing concern for Mexican communities in Chicago today, and one that I hope that what readers will take away is that gentrification is it's not just this kind of black and white good versus evil issue, but a really complicated set of dynamics and forces that had a lot of role players and that is much more nuanced. And so hopefully the readers will gain some new insight into Chicago and why it looks the way it looks today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We look forward to this. Now, you currently direct Raza Landscapes, a spatial humanities lab that explores the history of Latinx communities in urban environments, expanding the archive of these communities, collecting oral histories, and much more. Can you tell us about this project? How did it come to be, and the type of work that you're excited to lead through Raza Landscapes?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. So Raza Landscapes is a kind of pet project of mine. If I could just say a few things about the phrasing,
Sure.
it translates to kind of two definitions: racial landscapes or the people's landscape, and it comes out of really my 10 years now and more of doing research on Chicago, in which I amassed over the time a lot of sources and oral histories. I conducted roughly around 140 oral histories for my book, and digitized countless documents and family collections. I thought, wow, this is a lot of work, but also this is something that I think students would really be interested in doing as well. And so I hope that Raza Landscapes can be a kind of platform, not just for myself, but for my colleagues and students at Georgetown, to have us go out into the communities and into the neighborhoods. I can't wait for this pandemic to be over, because I want to take my students out to Mount Pleasant, to Columbia Heights, to Arlington, Virginia, and other areas, to really drill down and study and build relationships with community organizations and document the local Latinx communities of the DMV area. And so what I foresee in the long term for Raza Landscapes and that Spatial Humanities Lab is to build content and tell new stories about Latinx life in America in ways that is engaging and that engages a really broad public, not just those of us lucky to be at universities like Georgetown.
Well, we all look forward to the moment when we can all be back on campus, where you'll be able to take our students to Mount Pleasant and to Arlington and have a chance to really dig deeply into the communities that are around our university community. Michael, it's been such a joy to have this opportunity to be with you. In closing, is there a message you'd like to share with our community?
Absolutely. I'm so happy and ecstatic to be here at Georgetown. I welcome any of my colleagues at Georgetown and anyone else that wants to join me or invite me to any projects in which we're reaching out to local communities to work with them collaboratively and to be able to use our resources to help local communities in any way possible to empower them to tell their stories. I really welcome any help at all, and I also look to work collaboratively with those of you who are already involved in this kind of work, so that we can work together and really tap into a lot of the energy that's out here in the greater Washington, D.C. area.
Well, Michael, thank you. Thanks again for joining us today and for sharing more about your remarkable work. I'm very glad that we count you as a member of our Georgetown community and grateful for the expertise and scholarship that you share with our academic community. And I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you. For every Hoya, everywhere.